these proceedings are here to see that justice is done. And justice is, as any reasonable person would tell you, the finding of the truth. Only we have a problem here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor. And today we are talking Nick Reiner. I wanted to fill you guys in because in the last week or so, some interesting and new details are emerging about this case.
We have spent the week doing a deep dive, an investigation into the Rob and Michele Reiner murders.
You might remember that my initial gut reaction to this was, given everything that he's already admitted about his substance use history, it is extraordinarily unlikely that substances played no role in any of what happened here. And it is also possible and likely, given what we are hearing.
So, we shouldn't minimize the impact that the change of meds had on Nick Reiner, because as we speak right now, he would be utterly incompetent to stand trial. We've both talked about that. He
Correct.
is out of his head because they still haven't been able to figure out how to stabilize him with the meds. So it's not like this was just a meth killing. This was a guy whose meds were changed a month before the murders, and he just went into free fall.
During COVID, he had gone off the rails.
A friend told the Daily Mail Nick couldn't take care of himself. He was living on the streets, doing drugs, not eating, and refusing rehab, all in the height of COVID.
The New York Times found out that Nick Reiner was placed in a conservatorship in 2020. Interestingly, that's the pandemic year.
So under that conservatorship, Nick no longer had any personal control over his own medical care or his finances. And the conservatorship was just for a year, and at the end of the year, he was restored to competency, so the conservatorship ended.
Now, for those who do not know what a conservatorship is, it means that a judge has temporarily awarded someone else full control and authority over that person's affairs. So it's a legal term, but it has become popular in Hollywood circles to do this for people who are perceived to have a severe mental health, mostly, and that includes a substance use disorder, where a mental health professional who calls themselves a conservator, who specializes in this, is given full authority and control over that person's life. Now, we don't know the details of this particular conservatorship, but this has been a source of much controversy and a lot of difficulty for some Hollywood folks who I'm not going to get into now. So this is a controversial move and one that really signifies major desperation on the part of Nick's family. Somebody else is in charge of his finances, is in charge of his mental health, his physical health, is in charge of his life for 1 year. And at the end of that time, he apparently had restabilized. However,
I have spoken with people who were close to the Reiners who told me Michele in particular was pulling her hair out because she didn't know what else to do, that they had exhausted everything. And in the month before the murders, as they watched him, she was just, she beside herself, not knowing what to do. Let's start off, Mark, by playing the interview that one of our people did with somebody who is well acquainted with the area where Nick Reiner was arrested, Exposition Park.
So what you're about to see is an interview that TMZ conducted in the exact area where Nick Reiner was arrested. I want to make sure that everybody understands that's why I am showing this clip. It is so important because it gives us insight into what Nick Reiner was doing when he was arrested.
Is this the place that people come if they're looking for that? Like
every drug activity over here every night.
Every night?
Yeah,
now, Exposition Park obviously is lined with like USC. It's the stadiums. It's the museums. That doesn't deter people?
It don't deter shit. You can find anything you're looking for.
How dangerous is it out here? I'm thinking like a white...
Dangerous, period. Like for anybody, it's not about color around here. It's like dangerous area.
Like a rich white kid. Is this what, like, do you see that a lot? Like
everybody watch this. All nationalities come around here.
Just because
everybody's welcome.
Just because they already know.
Yeah, it's cracking right here.
Nick Reiner was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder around 2020. He was put on meds that stabilized him. Before that, he was heavy into drugs, including meth. When he went on the drugs for schizoaffective disorder, we're told he was not using illegal drugs. He was taking other prescription drugs that were creating problems, but not meth. That's what we were told.
Because of weight gain in the months before this incident, it appears as though, not uncommon to lots of other people who have mental illness, particularly those who are diagnosed with a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder with psychotic features, or schizoaffective disorder. Some of those medications do slow down your metabolism, amongst other things, slow you down, but also stabilize your thoughts. So they help you to feel less out of control. But as is very common to this population, going off of your meds is the single biggest challenge that mental health professionals face across the board, really, with any mental health condition, anyone who's on psychiatric medications, but in particular when there is weight gain as a significant side effect. Now, maybe a little different from other medications, maybe some mood stabilizers or antidepressants, antipsychotics can cause very significant weight gain, 100 pounds. Right? We're talking about somebody who's already in a fragile mental state, and now we're talking about their very being, their identity being so dramatically altered that they're wrestling, actually contemplating, there's got to be another way, because it can't be my only options are my mental sanity or I'm extremely obese, right? And to their credit, that's not the way it should be. We should be able to provide other options. The problem in part is that we are a system that looks to try to find the fastest way to get somebody stabilized. And oftentimes with psychiatric medication, it takes a lot of time, particularly in an outpatient basis, because you have to see how people are going to respond to these medications. And it takes 3 to 4, sometimes more weeks at a time to see how is a person going to do on a medication. Now, that doesn't mean that it takes 3 to 4 weeks for them to come out of a psychosis. No, usually that part happens relatively quickly, but whether or not there's going to be side effects, what those side effects are going to be, and how stable somebody's going to be long-term takes time to discern.
In the month before the murders, they changed his meds because he was complaining about weight gain from the meds he was on. They changed the meds. He went off the rails, and that ended a month later when he killed his parents. Now, the way he killed them, Mark, was so brutal. It was carnage. I'm not going to say what we were told, but it is awful.
And they had interviewed, as I brought to you, very famous substance use psychiatrist, Dr. Drew, who shared with you his thoughts about what this likely was with Nick Reiner.
And we talked to Dr. Drew about this, and he also believes, and we can get into this, why Nick Reiner may have been on meth. And if he was at Exposition Park looking for drugs when he was arrested, that probably wasn't his first rodeo in that month. Here's what Drew said.
The kind of violence that was on display here, to me, still reads methamphetamine. I keep saying that over and over again. It's not enough to have decompensated schizoaffective. The level of the violence And when he was picked up, it's worth trying to understand what part of town was he in? What was he doing there?
Yeah.
You know, was he near MacArthur Park?
It was a drug den. It was a drug den.
Guess what? That didn't start that night. that didn't start.
Right.
That's probably he needed more and he went to get more. Probably. I don't have any direct knowledge of this, but it's methamphetamine is the drug of violence.
Yes. Does this look like methamphetamine? Absolutely. And would it be unimaginable? And apparently, where it was that Nick Reiner was arrested is a notorious hotspot for drugs. A very infamous place, like an open market at night, for people of all shapes and sizes to come to purchase drugs, including methamphetamine.
By the way, you would have to know what you're doing to go down to Exposition
At
Park.
night.
At night. I mean, that place is wild.
Now, here's the thing about methamphetamine. We already know that Nick Reiner has admitted to be a person who's had a problem with it before. We also know drugs like methamphetamine and cocaine elicit what is very similar to mania, right? And mania is attractive. It's the more attractive aspect of, let's say, bipolar with psychotic features, where the state that leads up to more extreme psychosis, scary psychosis, is a state of mania. You know, feeling really invincible, like you can do anything, like you have endless amounts of energy. And that is an attractive state, right? That's why oftentimes people stop taking their medications because they want to feel better. They want to feel energized. And if you're taking some of these medicines that slow you way down, so you're moving through mud, of course, you just want to feel better. And if Nick Reiner was experiencing a lot of weight gain, they decide to change the meds, and he cannot restabilize. As someone who has a long history with substance abuse, who knows exactly where to go to get drugs in Los Angeles, California, would anybody be surprised if he went right to that open market to try to purchase drugs on the street? Of course not. This is home for him. This is where he was born and raised. This is a place he knows probably better than anyone, or just as well as anyone else. And I hate to say this because it sounds kind of shallow, but if I am struggling with a lot of weight gain, methamphetamine is the fastest way as a substance use disordered person that I will think of to lose that weight. Now, that may sound crazy to a rational, normal person, but we're talking about someone who's absolutely not rational and who is very likely going to return to what they know to try to feel better. And people that have very severe substance use disorders, that is what drugs and alcohol are for them. It's like the bottle to a baby. It's the thing that they want when they don't feel good because they think it's going to make them feel better. And yes, is it a very, very temporary feel better? Absolutely. But when you are in an extreme state of discomfort and you have a history like Nick Reiner, even if you are unstable psychiatrically, of course he's going to return to substance abuse. That is why we say that they're disordered. It's why it's an illness, because it defies all logic, all reason, and he probably didn't understand at all what was going on. And I'm not making an excuse. Believe me, I'm not making an excuse. But at that point, you're operating on autopilot. You don't understand, because if he did have some time away from drugs like methamphetamine, it's a drug that once you have a very high tolerance for it, okay, you can tolerate it. But if your brain is already scrambled from all these different medications and from coming off of antipsychotics, and you haven't been taking illicit drugs for a long time, then you go right back to the streets, you go right back to methamphetamine, you are going to be an absolute train wreck from a mental health perspective. Your brain is mush. It's scrambled. It doesn't understand what you're asking it to do. You're not going to be in your right mind. You're going to be totally out of your mind.
That this level of violence, normally what happens is you see that people get suicidal. You see when they get the change of drugs that they act out in weird ways. This is when you combine the meth and you see these horrible outcomes like we have here.
When you start connecting the dots, Mark, if he was going off the rails a month before the murders, he may well have been doing meth in, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before he ended up killing them.
That is not an excuse, and nobody is suggesting that anything he did should be excused. It's just an explanation for what very likely may have been going on.
I'm told by people in the ME's office that this was not just a brutal slaying, but this was something the likes of which people in that office had never seen before.
Yeah.
And just awful. And I don't want to dwell on it, but just like nothing they had ever seen. Hardened professionals who saw this and were traumatized.
When we first broke the story on TMZ.com, we had spoken to a couple of people in law enforcement, and they were horrified. I mean, it was just a brutal, awful scene.
Now, we don't have the toxicology, and the toxicology here is going to be critical because, yes, there's no question that Nick Reiner was struggling with mental illness. However,
he was off the rails with these meds. There's no question about it. But to reach the level of violence he did, that's why Drew, who has seen this, more times than anybody could imagine. He's saying he had to have something in his system. Now, I'm assuming, Mark, and you tell me, that when they arrested Nick, they would draw blood?
I can't imagine that they would not have done a blood draw because, look, they're doing an investigation. They want to know proactively, they being the DA's office, what was he under the influence of? They have to know that this was, anybody who picks up the file, and by the way, you've got a very able deputy DA who was assigned to it. He would have been involved for major crimes from the get-go.
it appears as though this case very likely involves substance use directly, not months or years before, but at the time of these murders.
So if you want to talk about chicken egg, it seems like what came first is the change of meds, and the consequence of that was meth. So, that's the best argument for saying the not guilty by reason of insanity defense is intact because it all triggered with the change in schizoaffective meds.
And that, of course, is going to be the big question for the jury, if this case ever gets there, because it may very well be that he doesn't even pass the competency test. And that brings us to what Nick Reiner is like now.
And I will tell you this. I've talked to somebody who has interviewed him face-to-face at Twin Towers. And I will tell you that as recently in the last 5 days, that he is, at least when he was meeting with this person, he was in such a kind of a docile, puppy-like way about him, that he was, that literally was the almost complete opposite of the state of mind he would have had to have been to have committed this act.
Now, in psychology, we call this a regression, a return to a psychological state that feels safer. And given everything we know about Nick Reiner, who's never worked a day in his life that wasn't supported directly by his parents, by his father, would it surprise us that his reaction to this type of overwhelm, this type of unimaginable violence, even to him, the person who engaged in such violence and now who is in prison, has had all of his power, agency, and freedom completely taken away? Would it surprise anyone that he is reverting to a safer developmental stage in life? Absolutely not.
I am telling you that it was described to me as somebody who was almost toddler-like in where his state of mind was.
So that's interesting, because I was told by somebody who was in a similar position that he knew what he did, but he was so out of his head, he does not understand why he's in jail for it, that he thinks this is a conspiracy against him. I don't know if that aligns with what you're hearing.
It does, in the sense that it's almost like the way he was being described is kind of like this childlike naivete, kind of divorced from the reality of the situation.
In fact, we know, we're not just convinced, we know that the legal process will reveal the true facts of the circumstances surrounding this case, Nick's case. You know, a lot's been printed of late, over the last 3 weeks. A lot has been printed about Nick, printed about his family, printed about the circumstances. Speculation is in print. On December 15th, in the early morning hours, I was in New York at the time, and I got a call. Me and my team, we dropped everything. And for the last 3 weeks, we've devoted literally every waking hour to protecting Nick and his interests. We've investigated this matter top to bottom, back to front. What we've learned, and you can take this to the bank, is that pursuant to the laws of this state, pursuant to the law in California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder. Print that. Print that.
Now, lastly and importantly to many of us, it is being reported that the family had nothing to do with Alan Jackson stepping away from this case.
And we have other new information from journalist Rob Reiner. A source close to the family spoke to Reiner and said that Nick Reiner's family is reportedly feeling blindsided after his former attorney, Alan Jackson, walked away from the case.
And in fact, that they were blindsided to hear that he was stepping away. So the speculation about this being money-driven seems to not hold up. It is also being reported that it is only Alan Jackson at this moment who knows why he stepped away, that this was actually a personal decision of his. Makes me wonder whether or not, in the end, Alan Jackson, despite anything that he may have said, if he doesn't discern now that he's got the toxicology report, that he doesn't want to fight this fight. Now, I don't know that that's true. I don't know if I could even imagine that Alan Jackson isn't up for any fight. But who knows? Right? Maybe he determined at the end of it all that they just couldn't win. But he decides to do what he thinks is the right thing and make a definitive statement of Nick Reiner's innocence to try to help him as he's walking away. Now, of course, none of us know. That is pure speculation, and we may never know. But it is interesting, and of course, we will be watching very closely.
It is the defense counselor's duty to protect the rights of the individual, as it is the prosecution's duty to uphold and defend the laws of the state. Justice for all. Only we have a problem here.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush.
This is me reminding you to like this video, comment, subscribe, like this video.